Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 213th MakerDAO Governance and Risk Call. My name is Patrick. I'm one of the governance facilitators at MakerDAO, filling in for our usual host, Peyton, who's on a well-earned holiday. So just to start with, we're going to go over a few ground rules for the call. So just a reminder, this call is recorded, so bear that in mind if you're saying anything or asking any questions. How you present will be uploaded to YouTube. Please avoid trying talking over everyone. If you can, turn your camera on. If you don't want to go on camera, that's also fine. I don't turn on my camera. If you want to make a point, please raise your hand, use the reactions button, click the raise hand button, and then one of us will call on you to talk. And if you're new to the call, or even if you're old to the call, if you're speaking, please introduce yourself first. But do feel free to raise your hands, ask questions in the chat. I will ask them to the speakers as well. But basically, try not to be a bleep. Right, moving on to our agenda for the day. So we'll have our usual governance roundup from the GovAlpha team and from GovComms. And then we're going to move on to our initiative update section, where we're going to have some core unit facilitators talking about the effects of the recently ratified Endgame proposals. And then I'm going to hand over to David from GovComms, who's going to chair a discussion on MIP 88 and 89. And hopefully we'll get some good input and discussion there. So moving on to our votes, we had several important votes that ended on Monday. We had 9 ratification polls. They ended on all of them successfully, and they will be covered by our MIP editors in the MIPs update. We also had a poll to reallocate the MIP 65 asset allocation, which was approved by maker voters. So when we are ready to move forward with the next onboarding for Monetalis, we will be using the new newly agreed collateral types. Our latest executive went live yesterday. That completes the technical onboarding for Rocket Pool ETH, although there will be no debt ceiling until the oracles have reached a quorum in a couple of weeks, and then we will activate the debt ceiling with a further executive. And it's also implemented a technical upgrade to the Starknet bridge, which allows a fee to be added in the future if we so desire. There's currently about 47,000 MKR supporting that executive, so we've got about 62,000 to go. And there is an office hours modifier on this executive, so at this point it won't be activating until Monday at the earliest. Next week's executive, we have the housekeeping to follow up the core unit offboardings. So that will be yanking DAI and MKR streams, as well as sending out some golden parachute payments. We'll be whitelisting Oasis.app on the Rocket Pool ETH Oracle, and as well as funding the Block Tower legal and risk assessment SPF. And we will also be performing the technical deployment for the Maker Teleport on Starknet. So quite a busy executive next week. Next slide, please, David. So I'm now going to hand over to the MIP editors for the MIPs update. I believe it's Pablo this week.
That's right. Thank you, Patrick. Hello, everyone. Pablo here with a MIPs update. So the October ratification polls closed on Monday, and they all passed. For this governance cycle, we had 9 of them: the Endgame pre-launch MIP set, the shortening of the feedback period for the facilitator affording process, the facilitator affording for William Bremer from Real World Finance, which, however, had lower precedence than the likewise ratified coordinate affording for said coordinates, 2 other coordinate affordings for events and for strategic happiness. So that's 3 coordinate affordings we had. A special purpose fund to fund legal work on Black Tower, and 2 top-level MIPs, MIP 81, Coinbase Institutional Rewards, and MIP 82, Monetalis Coinbase Palooza. For more details on this, I invite you to scan the weekly MIPs update that was posted in the forum on Monday. So now let's move on to the proposals in RFC. We have a great number of these. Some are eligible to enter the November cycle, and some are eligible to enter the January cycle at the earliest, as there's no governance cycle in December. So with November being a budget submission window, we have 6 coordinated budgets for the upcoming governance cycle, namely for DAX, Unified Security, GovComms, Sidestream Auction Services, TechOps, and SES. We also have 6 standalone MIPs in RFC, MIP 80, the Maker Compensation Guidelines, the yield earning proposals from CoinShares and Origin Dollar, MIP86 and MIP87, 2 new proposals from Monetalis, MIP88 and MIP89, MIP90, liquid AAA structured credit and money market fund, and MIP91, which describes a prospective contract against governance attacks. MIP90 and MIP91 are eligible to enter the January governance cycle at the earliest. And finally, we have a couple of loose sub-proposals. In addition to their budget, we have another 2 sub-proposals related to unified security, a mandate modification, and a facilitator onboarding for Psychonaut. We also have a proposal to modify the upper limit for the protocol-owned fault emulation that just got approved as part of the Endgame pre-launch MIP set, and a proposal to remove MIP 14, which defines a generic process for transferring DAI from the Maker protocol to a target Ethereum address. So as for important dates, November 2nd is the last day to introduce modifications in eligible proposals aiming to enter that governance cycle, and the formal submission window for November opens on November the 7th. That's pretty much all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo. I'm just going to throw it straight over to Artem for the forum recap.
Hey, so we're going to go to the slide, but before, wait, is it this one? Wait. Hold on. Shouldn't be this one. That says 14th to the 19th. It's okay. All right, let me just share my screen really quick.
Make sure you're also sharing your sound.
Oh, Lord. Is it sharing it?
Hit play. I don't hear it if you're talking over the video. It might be worth it to just post the link and we could skip the segment today.
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, cool.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. David, if
Yeah.
you take back control and get the slides up, we will move on to the next segment. So for our initiative updates this week, we're going to talk a bit about the Endgame proposal set that's just passed. So it was the pre-launch MIP set for the Endgame. We've asked several different core unit facilitators to kind of describe how their core unit is going to approach this new governance paradigm and any changes they're seeing for their immediate work. So first up, I think we have Robert from Collateral Engineering, who is going to share what they're going to do.
Hey, Patrick, thanks very much. Hi, community. Okay, this is fun. Last week, I shared an update regarding upcoming CES actions related to the RWF offboarding. This week, with the Endgame MIPS passing and further thoughts and discussion with my team, I wanted to provide additional updates to CES's support of the Endgame plan and launch. This may or may not change some of the information I presented last week. As you know, we're building an airplane as we fly, so everything is subject to modification. During our CSI call this week, it was clear that risk will lead the decentralization collateral priorities. I'll allow them to comment on their approach when they're ready. CES and the collateral stakeholders will continue to support the onboarding and management of our decentralized collateral in a very similar fashion as we do today. Overall risk was the key stakeholder for decentralized collateral, so there's not many changes here, if any at all. With MIP 83 passing, I see more significant change to the way that we onboard RWAs. Today, Maker has 2 recognized protector clusters per the verbiage of MIP 83. In past conversations with Rune, I had agreed that CES would assist the clusters and help, where applicable, with onboarding of collateral. Effectively, this shifts the application, deal, and prioritization processes to the protector clusters. There are many artifacts left from MIP 6 through 12 and MIP 67 that can be used as resources, and I would suggest the clusters take a look at that material. I'm also happy to work with the clusters if they need any help here or like any interpretation, at least from my perspective, as it relates to that documentation and process. One key question we'll need to ask during our CSI call on Mondays is, for new collateral applications, is there an intention for a protector cluster to adopt this vault if onboarded? If not, CES will place the implementation work at the lowest priority. There are exceptions to this, for example, MIP 81, the coin-based institutional rewards. CES will work closely with the collateral stakeholders to determine the exceptions and prioritize our work appropriately. One of the gaps I see today is the lack of legal, deal, credit, risk, and other types of professional support to help onboard RWAs. We'll be looking to the protector clusters to start to engage and help fill some of these gaps. From a technical perspective, it's rare that technology holds up any of these deals. When CES proposes a solution, many times it shortens the implementation time, as well as other side benefits like reducing risk. Every RWA implementation we've done had many details to consider. Unfortunately, I find very little in RWAs to be simple, and our goal is to find ways to reduce this complexity. Hey, at the end of the day, CES works for the MKR holders and will honor the MIPS and the vote. Where there's a lack of clarity with most, if not all RWA deals, we'll put it back out to the community to ensure there's alignment. A lot of times that'll happen through a governance vote. It's common for details to change or modify the intent of the MIP after ratified, so this could be a very important step. In addition, there's a lot of work to do with the scopes, toolkits, processes to launch the Endgame. And given CES's deep experience with RWAs, we plan to assist in the creation of these items. I'm not sure what that looks like at the moment, but we'll be ready to help as this is clarified. I know I covered a lot of ground, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have on the call. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Robert. That was a really detailed answer there. Does anyone have any questions for Robert? Feel free to raise your hand or drop them in the chat, and we can always cycle back as well if you want to ask them later on. That's fine. Let's move on then. And like I said, ask them in the chat if you want to come back to that. So moving on, it's my core unit, @GovAlpha. So we're just going to have a quick description of what's changed from a governance perspective with these new proposals that have passed. Slightly different to Robert's talk, is much less about what @GovAlpha will be doing, but just more about how governance in general is going to work moving forwards. Okay, so when we look at the amendment to MIP1 that passed, we've changed the problem space. So we've got rid of all of the previous items that were in the problem space, and these are the 5 new items that have been created in the problem space in MIP1. So that's adding a constitution for MakerDAO, which will serve as like a framework for how things should work moving forwards, a social contract and pre-agreements in the words of the author, to stabilize the endgame state. We're going to be launching endgame product MIPs, which means that these are the MIPs that will define everything in the end game. So every product we're going to launch, so whether that's 𝘧𝘪𝘴, whether that's ethd, will have an associated MIP with it. And then we will we will so that's part of the problem space. We will have the scope MIPs. So each scope MIP will cover one of the 11 planned scopes, and they will define governance processes and kind of the expectations of the decentralized workforce. We'll have metanomics. So the metanomics MIP will be the definition of the long run unchangeable tokenomics of the endgame state. So this will include kind of MKR emissions, what we do with surplus buffer, MetaDAO emissions, and what MetaDAOs do with their surplus buffers. So that will be a MIP that's required. And then finally, we'll have the activation of the launch MetaDAOs, which will be the kind of part of the launch of the endgame rather than the pre-launch. And that will be when we authorize the deployment and the activation of MetaDAO tokens and the MetaDAO token farms. So that's what constitutes the problem space. So why is the problem space important? So if we refer to MIP2 and MIP2C2, it is looking at the problem space. And when the problem space is solved, maker governance ossifies. And what that means is we go from our current 1 month request for comment period and our 1 week frozen period, we instead move to a 3 month request for comment period. So it really lengthens the time for any governance proposals to take effect in Maker at the MIP level. So that's what this problem space is addressing. So when all of these things are addressed and we've launched the endgame and we have all of this stuff in place, Maker governance will slow down within reason. There will still be, I believe, a weekly cycle. There will still be ways to get things up to a vote, but things like top-level MIPs and sub-proposals will take a lot longer to move through the governance process unless otherwise specified. And again, so moving on, we've removed the collateral onboarding process, right? So MIP 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, and 12 are gone. That means there are no more green lights. So that's no longer a thing. So if someone wants to onboard a collateral, they can't come and post a MIP 6 application. And instead that collateral onboarding power, then that process has been devolved to the core units like collateral engineering services, like strategic finance, and like risk. That depends on the nature of the collateral that's being onboarded. Similarly, MIP 16 has been amended. We now no longer have signal requests. So what this means is that no one can come to the forum and say, I want to change the PSM T-in, and I'm going to propose a signal request. That doesn't exist anymore. There are some exceptions to this. So if a MIP specifies a signal request, then you can still use a signal request. So an example MIP would be MIP 24, which is the emergency response procedure written by David, which includes signal requests as part of the process. Another example would be MIP 61, which is delegate compensation. If you want to change the parameters for delegate compensation, you need to put up a signal request as part of that process. So you can still use signal requests in that context. But if signal requests are not otherwise specified in a MIP, you cannot use it to do anything. Okay, so 𝘱𝑗𝑠 will now no longer be permitting signal requests to be posted to the forum unless they meet those requirements. What this means is that facilitators or additional parameter proposal groups will have much more say in parameter setting at Maker, because that is how changes are going to get on chain, is through one of those two things or through MIPs. We have a number of MIPs that were written to define things, such as the D3M, such as the PSM, the DSR, that don't have sub-proposals to amend the parameters, right? And that's a problem. So so things like delegate compensation, there's a process, a sub-proposal, a signal request, you amend the parameters using that process. But for the PSM, there's no defined process for how someone would propose to change the PSM parameters. Traditionally, that would have been a signal request. So we need to have a think about how people who aren't core unit facilitators or who aren't members of parameter proposal groups can propose governance changes like that. So 𝘱𝑗𝑠 have had a chat internally, and what we're going to do is we're going to bring a generic parameter adjustment MIP forward to the forum in the new year. What this will do, this will be limited in scope, because we don't want to just end up in a kind of a free-for-all situation where, but we will be looking at specifically MIPs where there is no parameter adjustment process like the PSM MIP. And there will be a means for someone who isn't a core unit facilitator to bring forward a vote to MKR voters. But the key things here is it will be a slow process. And you wouldn't be able to propose multiple parameters in one go. You'd kind of have to make it narrow. Is that a question for me, Adrian, in the chat? Yeah, so Adrian's asked in the chat for anyone that can't see it. In theory, couldn't anyone still just go straight to an executive spell like always? So for example, to change the DSR. So yes, but that a bit of power, if you like, is limited to core unit facilitators that have been elected by Maker governance, and it would have to be relevant to their mandate. So, for changing the DSR, there's several facilitators that could claim it might be related to their mandate, but they always want to be risk, okay? But say Premosh doesn't want to do that, or someone wants to change the DSR and Premosh disagrees, there's then no way for you to kind of go around Premosh. And so there, in theory, you should have a system where someone can ask MKR voters directly, do you support this change, rather than it being blocked by a facilitator ad infinitum. Any dev could code a spell, yeah, and put it on chain. You would have to get MKR voters to support it, and we would not be listing it on the executive portal unless it was an officially compiled executive through the usual process involving GovAlpha and PE. But yes, theoretically, any dev could code the changes and ask people to support it, given it's a permissionless system. Right, can we move on to the next slide, David? So we've also had some expanded core unit mandates. So we've had expanded mandates for strategic finance, for risk, and for collateral engineering. So the main crux of these mandate expansions is to do with collateral onboarding. So we'll be working with those core units around these areas, and we'll be supporting them in any way we can. Then we have MIP 83, which describes the recognized MetaDAO launch clusters. These are the planned Protector and Creator DAO clusters that will be part of the Endgame launch. For now, Governor DAOs are not part of this. They were removed during the RFC period, but I believe they will be added back in at some point. And this is the kind of the planned MetaDAOs we will launch with when we have sorted out the metanomics and we are ready to go with the initial executive launch at the end of the process. In terms of the clustering, the clusters are starting to form. There's a few that have already proposed themselves, and there will be a governance process for them to get ratified and acknowledged as formal MetaDAOs later on. MIP 84 is the protocol-owned Vault emulation. From a governance perspective, not a lot for us to do yet. This will need audit work done, smart contract development done. But once that's done and all the audits are done, and we have our risk parameters suggested by the risk team, we'll be putting that forward to an executive vote, given it's been approved. And then finally, we have the core unit offboardings, which will be completed in next week's executive. So we've already taken some action here in collaboration with GovComms and TechOps. So we've removed the relevant core unit facilitators from the Discord roles, from their forum roles, and we're in the process of archiving their core unit categories and their core unit channels on Discord. We will be, and as described earlier, we'll be sorting out the final vesting stream changes and parachute payments next week. So that's how GovAlpha is going to approach the Endgame. Apologies, that was quite a long blurb, but I think it's important to make sure it's clear. Who's up next?
I guess similar question for like a second, like if anybody has Q&A for you.
Oh yeah, of course, feel free, yeah. And again, we can always come back to questions at the end if anyone thinks of anything, and just drop it in the chat. I can also answer in the chat while we go on. Let's move on, David.
Yeah, sure.
So next up, hopefully we have Mark from Strategic Finance going to talk us through how they're going to approach things.
Hey, Patrick. Hey, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, and it's going to be a tough one to follow up. It's quite detailed, but yeah, for those of you, I'm sure people have largely familiarized themselves with the MIPs, albeit there are quite a lot of MIPs this governance cycle. I do get a ton of questions about real-world assets, the future of real-world assets, how they relate to the endgame plan. Strategic Finance's new expanded mandate to support that. So I figured I'd start off just by reading literally what it says in the new passed MIP 39 amendment from Rune. It says the Strategic Finance Core Unit mandate makes the SFC facilitator also able to unilaterally, with no additional process, propose non-standard weekly votes and executive votes related to the following subjects: RWA collateral, risk parameter changes for RWA collateral, other risk parameters in the Maker protocol, RWA collateral onboarding and offboarding, and other votes and governance actions related to risk, DAI collateral, and risk parameters. Also, any other votes and governance actions related to the content described in the informational mandate below. And people can follow up in reading. That's just my standard mandate after that. So, with that said, that's obviously a very significant expansion of the mandate. It's basically been the mandate of an entire core unit with a budget 8x the size of SF's current core unit. That said, we've thus far taken this approach of ad hoc SPF budgets to continue the onboarding of collateral, and that's going to be largely what we continue to do in the future as we move towards implementation of the endgame plan. There's clusters being proposed, creators, protectors. We're really a long way though away from launching anything officially as it relates to endgame. So through this period, SF, CES, we're going to be helping facilitate the onboarding of real world asset collateral. There's a lot of deals that have hit the forums over the past few months related to investing MakerDAO assets, and thankfully we're in a position where we can take advantage of the TradFi rates that have basically flip-flop with the crypto native rates in the industry. And obviously we're in the process, people are starting to see MIP 65 being implemented, money moving with that. The GUSD PSM is over 100 million now and increasing by 50 million a day. Obviously Coinbase MIP just passed. So there's a lot of exciting things which will help us finance and smooth the transition to the endgame plan. But there is indeed a lot to do between the Maker Core for Strategic Finance Core Unit, the prospective clusters, and the arrangers themselves. So it's definitely going to be a busy time, and we look forward to answering any questions from the community and collaborating to continue the vision of onboarding and kind of bridging the gap between DeFi and TradFi in the real world. It's always been the main reason I got involved in this protocol in the first place was because of the work that Maker was doing here, and we continue to lead the industry in real world collateral onboarding. And right now, it is indeed fraught with tons of complexity and tons of issues. It's not easy. There's tons of risks. People mention them constantly. We're all aware of the risks, but I think for us to make a positive impact on the world, if we want to actually do that, we're going to have to work with real world counterparties and be on the cutting edge to making real world assets native to DeFi. So I guess with that, I'll leave it there and answer any questions if anyone has anything specific they'd like to ask. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
I have a question there, Mark. Thanks for that. Those words of wisdom there with regards to RWAs. Do you see your core unit clustering eventually in the end game, or do you believe that your core unit will remain for the near short term as a core unit of the Maker Core?
That's a very good question. I guess, with the expanded mandate, there's certainly a path towards clustering. And obviously, SEB has been named within the Viridian cluster. So I think there's still a lot that needs to happen, especially at the Maker Core level, before there's any sort of formal transition, if that were to be the direction that we all decide to go. In particular, one area is that Rune has mentioned in the endgame plan is the RWA Council that sits at the Maker Core level. They're effectively the new real asset core unit, but instead of working with the end borrowing counterparty, they're working with the MetaDAOs, basically creating rules around how the MetaDAOs and their effective lines of credit are governed. And that's going to be a role of critical importance in the future to make sure that the core protocol's interests are protected against both the metadAOs and the arrangers. And I think that's really a critical kind of next step before the metadAOs and arrangers are too mature, because they're going to have to kind of help build that foundation for that relationship and that structure. And right now that's a big gap, but it's something that is being talked about.
Got it. And as far as funding going forward, I know you mentioned the use of special purpose fund, MIP 55. Is that something that your team is going to continue to use, or should we expect some type of budgeting to be put up pretty soon in the forums to kind of help you with all of the legal research and all of the due diligence that needs to be done for some of these outstanding proposals?
Yeah, it's another good question. I think in the immediate term, we're going to continue to use SPFs. We're definitely thinking about longer term, especially in light of I think the timeline that we had been discussing on the DVC yesterday in preparation for the launch, because I think we're with the new mandate officially passed. I think it makes more sense to potentially have budget change in support of that mandate. But obviously up until that point, it made more sense for there to be SPFs. But it's something we're still thinking about and haven't made a decision on.
Cool, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. And good questions there, Frank. So thank you. Anyone else got any questions for Mark before we move on? Seems like a no. Okay, so next we're going to cover some changes for the risk score unit, but I believe David is filling in for Primož.
Yeah, that's right. Spoke to Primož. He couldn't make the meeting today, but there were just a few different highlights, or maybe touch points is a better word to use. But basically, the rundown from risk is that number one, they're in talks regarding the collateral onboarding process, and also the potential formation of a collateral onboarding committee or council, TBD. They don't intend to be involved with real world assets, even though their mandated expansion does enable them to do both. Primož, the facilitator, will be having a call with Rune to understand more on the cluster/metadAO vault adoption, because all future collateral onboardings depend on clusters adopting and managing them. And so basically, yeah, risk is figuring it out is the TLDR. And any questions, feel free to submit in the chat and I could forward them to Primož.
Thank you, David. So I believe that's all of the core units that have formally agreed to stand up and do anything today. But if there's anyone else in the call who wants to mention what their core unit's doing, feel free. Equally, we can come back if there's any more questions at this point. And that's absolutely fine. So I think we'll move on. So I am now going to hand over the reins to David, who is going to take us through our discussion segment today.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, so much. How's it going, everybody? Today we're going to be talking about Monetalis's recently submitted MIPs 88 and 89. And so a really brief overview of each. MIP 88 is called Redwood Friesian. It is a real-world asset vault that takes 225 million 𝘰, swaps it for a USDC from the PSM, and invests it into residential mortgage-backed securities through Redwood's Sequoia securitization platform. My understanding is it's basically a very similar method as MIP 65, but in the questions portion of this, we're going to dig into that. As for MIP 89, the title is Andalusian. It is also a real-world asset vault. It takes 300 million 𝘰, swaps it for USDC from the PSM, and that is invested in BlackRock/iShares ETF products, which use Arrow Global as the entity doing that. And similarly, yeah, it's a very similar method to MIP65. And so that's my really brief summary of the two. We do have a bunch of questions that we fielded from stakeholders, but before we get into that, I want to give the teams a chance to talk on both. So Alessio, if you want to take it, or if anybody from your team wants to take it, I know Alan Peterson is also here, and then some people from Arrow and also Redwood. So yeah, take it away, guys.
Okay, so yeah, let me start. So thanks for having us, and thanks for going through these two MIPs. I think so today we have a good number of people from Arrow, and we've got a good number of people from Redwood. So I'll actually try and get a lot of these questions that you have specifically answered by them, so you hear it directly from those parties. I think in both cases, we're talking about moving into what you'd call private structured credit. One of them focusing on the US, another one focusing on EU and UK. There are other pieces of them that are distinctly different, but they can both explain that. But I think I guess the key part that we as Monetalis, as an arranger, we're trying to do is to say set the things up very much for the MIPs situation, where we try to arrange for the cluster that we try to work with a situation where you could take MIP65 as sort of the bottom of the pyramid. It's providing highly secure, government bond types of yields, easily liquid, and so on. And then what we try is to get some opportunities that moves up the pyramid that has different yield curves and higher yields and are more in structured credit. And these are those two. So with MIP65, with MIP88, MIP89, and the other MIP82, we're trying to get to a place where we have a sufficient amount of approved counterparties and structures that makes it possible for a MetaDAO cluster to have opportunities to develop a appropriate asset allocation strategy that would work for a stablecoin. Move a little bit in here and move a little bit in here, and so on. So that would be that's sort of the background for this. I just wanted you to understand that was us trying to make sure that we have a good range of approved counterparties that the MetaDAOs could work with. But with that, what we've tried to do here is I wanted to let Arrow and Redwood present themselves, because ultimately, we're a ranger, and the counterparties in truth are Arrow and Redwood. So I've asked them to try and give a short description of their history and who they are and so on. And so I'll let each of the two parties present themselves, and maybe we can start with which one do you have here? You've got Redwood.
Let's do Redwood. Yeah. So Jeremy, I think if you would be welcome to share some information about Redwood with us.
Yeah. First of all, can everyone hear me okay? I am still struggling with Teams versus, Zoom and all the rest. So
you're coming in clear.
So first of all, I just want to echo what Alan was saying. Really appreciate the opportunity to crash the party with you guys and talk a little bit about us. I'll start with, our intent is just to be as transparent as possible about who we are, what we do, why we get up every day and come work at Redwood. So if you guys have questions, please feel free to chime in. My colleague, Karen Newman, is in my office with me. So I have a tendency to be able to just talk. So I'm happy to talk for as long as you guys would like to have me, but I want to make sure I touch on your guys' points. So Redwood Trust, we are a publicly traded company. Our ticker is RWT. So if you guys wanted to dig in on your own time, kind of go down the proverbial rabbit hole, all of our information is publicly available, adhere to all the same rules that everybody else who is publicly traded. We are structured as what's referred to as a REIT. That's an acronym for Real Estate Investment Trust. Very simply put, I mean, there's a lot of nuances from a tax perspective in order for us to, quote, satisfy that REIT status. But in short, it means the business that we operate in has to do with, housing or mortgages. And for us specifically, we deal on the spectrum of residential housing. So think of Jane and John Doe consumer, buying and selling houses. And so what we do is we aggregate loans, and just kind of a semi-fancy word to say that I buy a lot of mortgages and we structure them in a way that we can create assets for our investor base. There's a couple ways in which we do this. So there's what I think is in the MIP 88, which structured finance, and we have what's called a securitization shelf. We call it Sequoia. The acronym for that is SEMT. And which we will tranche out an underlying pool of loans to create various risk profiles for wide range of investors in the general financial world. We transact with insurance companies, money markets, banks, some foreign capital. It really kind of covers the whole spectrum of kind of pockets of money around the world, if you will, to be a little profound. This is something that Redwood's been doing since the mid-90s. So our shelf has been around since I want to say 96 or 97. And we are at this point, I think, with all of the cycles that the global economy as well as the US economy has been through since then, we're the longest tenured standing REIT in the United States. I highlight that because I know myself and my colleagues and our senior leadership are pretty proud of that, because we've experienced a lot as a world, as a country. Great financial crisis in 2006, 7, and 8. The current events that we're going through, both geopolitically and at home. There's just been a lot of stuff. So, we've been able to navigate those, I think, very well. So we have a long track record. There's a lot of information around what we do out there, both publicly as well as in the secondary and tertiary markets. One of the things we did, and we talked with Alan and company at length, is we put together a ton of information. And I think to the point, Alan, I'll let you opine if you want, but he was almost like, whoa, that's a lot of information. And our intent is, we do one thing here at Redwood. I have one job, one business line that I manage, and that is to source the highest quality, what we refer to as jumbo mortgages, and I'll explain what that means. But the highest quality jumbo mortgage is possible to then create investments for investors that we've done business with for years and years and years. One of the things that I've said many times over my 9-year career at Redwood has been, my job's not to sell anybody. I'm not an advisor. I don't manage other people's money. My job is to figure out what investors want and then go create it, go source it. So we have very regular interactions with our investor base. I would say that I spend probably the overwhelming majority of my time talking with people who buy our loans or buy our securities, just to answer questions about markets, what we're thinking, what we're doing, why, new changes in whatever their investment protocols or tolerances, hurdles, you name it. We're kind of in a service position here. Whereas, again, we don't work on Wall Street. We work with Wall Street. They, in kind of our view, they pitch ideas and try to convince people to buy stuff. We kind of take a reverse approach to that. It's like, hey, what are you guys interested in? How can we work together to create value or perceive value for you guys, right? It's a novel difference, I think, but it's one that, we really do practice that on a daily basis. And that goes not only with the investments we create and the investors we work with, but how we go and source these loans. So as I mentioned a second ago, we play in what's called the jumbo space. As you would imagine, that just means big. So the loans we deal with on average are about $1 million in size. And the big differentiating factor of the loans we deal with is they do not meet Fannie and Freddie or Ginnie Mae, which are the very large, GSEs and government-backed financial institutions for housing. They don't meet their criteria specifically around the size. So it's an area that we refer to as kind of the wealthy, higher asset borrowers. We provided a number, I think, of statistics, but we deal with really affluent borrowers, really strong credit, really strong underwrite. And we also take a lot of care from the day we onboard the people we buy loans from, which is a very, intensive process. We have an incredibly detailed review of financials that we perform, hand-holding around underwriting to ensure that the product that they go and originate meets our standards exactly. We consult and hire third-party vendors to check and validate and re-underwrite stuff that we do, along with our internal underwriting crew, which has been, in a lot of cases, doing this for 20 plus years. All with the intent that we can produce a homogeneous and very consistent product on the other side. Talked with Alan and the Monetalis and Maker teams at length. Like, one of the jokes we've coined over the years is like, Redwood is incredibly boring in what we produce, meaning it's consistent from deal to deal. There's very little deviation from deal to deal. And what that allows, in our experience from feedback we received from investors, is, they generally don't have to think very hard about what they're getting. Whereas, kind of picking on maybe some of our competitors on Wall Street, they're kind of moving the football, to use that loosening the football expression, where it's like, hey, we changed this, slightly different words here, collateral slightly different, and it makes for kind of a harder repetition when people are focusing on the deals. Because one of the many things that Alan was sharing with us, and part of what you guys I think are trying to accomplish in hearing this and in our talks with Monetalis, is how do you guys expand what you guys are focused on, and can you do that repeatedly? Can you do it safely? What are those options out there? And given our track record and how long we've been doing this, we are a very regular and active participant in this, what's called the new issue space, in the securitization or private label securitization market. And the reason being is, we have a lot of investors who have a certain amount of capital that they're deploying for this sector. And when given the option, they prefer to participate in our Sequoia shelf. So being a regular participant, so people can plan to that, is crucial. It kind of goes back to that overarching theme that, my job and the rest of the team here over at Redwood is to work as constructively with our investors, to figure out what they're looking for. If there's a way that we can, source assets, create assets, structure things a way that meets needs. So I'll pause there. That was kind of a long elevator speech. So hopefully that made some sense. I'm happy to backtrack, deviate. Do you guys want to go down a rabbit hole? Let me know. I brought snacks. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeremy, for that introduction. And definitely, if anybody has any questions specifically for Redwood, feel free to bring them up.
Yeah, so
Alan, if you wanted to say something, go for it. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, no, I think this was a wonderful introduction. This was all I hoped for here for Redwood. So I think I would like to let Arrow to make a similar presentation, and then they're all fair game for any kind of questions.
It's all yours, John.
Looks like I'm the delegate speaker today. I was so anyway. Look, a little bit of background. My name's 𝘱𝘯𝘪𝘵. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here talking about Arrow and what we do as a business. My role at Arrow is I'm the group head of IT and change, but I also have a secondary function, which is the principal of distribution and securitization for our, I suppose, tech-driven and it's a blockchain tokenization program to create liquidity in illiquid assets, and that's kind of part of why I'm involved with this process. Andrew Fox, who was on the call earlier, who will rejoin in a second, he's kind of running the interface of the program with Monetalis and what we do on the specific deal. But to give you some background on Arrow, I suppose off the cuff, unprepared. Essentially, Arrow is a vertically integrated asset manager and servicer in Europe, and that means that we service loans and assets on behalf of around 200 banks across 5 countries in Europe. We own 17 servicing platforms in those geographies. We have something like 70 billion euro of assets under management that we service for people. The exact number, we have assets that we own on our own balance sheet, and I think that's around 2 billion euro. And Andrew will have to probably correct me on the exact number. But we're also a vertically integrated fund manager and asset manager. So we also have a part of our capital stack is provided by limited partners or LPs. And we are just drawing to the close our first fund, which we deployed about 1.7 billion euro. We're in the throes of closing our second fund, which is going to be around 3 billion euro. And every trade that we do, we co-invest with those limited partners. So we have effective skin in our game from our own balance sheet on those investments in assets. And from a business perspective, we have, our heritage is in distressed assets historically and non-performing loans, where we've purchased huge, very large pools over a period of 17 years. We claim a track record that on average across 17 years, we make an internal IRR for our fund of about 18% per annum. These are pretty big numbers, but it's possible because we have the granular access, not only from the fund management, the ownership of those assets, but we also own the servicing and the collection and the coalface, dealing with the customer and all of the data and the control that gives us in that marketplace. So when we look at asset classes, unlike Redwood, which is very monochromatic, like they do one thing and they do it incredibly well, we have a different approach to our market, and that is diversity of pools across different asset classes. It all fundamentally has the same kind of view, but I think we work in 12 different asset classes, everything from retail distress to SME to corporate to some elements of property, and also then into the category, I suppose, of performing loans and bridge lending, and I think that's the area where we're involved with Monetalis in some green ESG friendly bridge lending into real estate collateral, and that's the space that we're in. So that's kind of us as a business. It's exciting to be part of the Monetalis program, and I'm sure that Alessio and Alan can explain in more detail, but where we sit in the capital stack is a junior funding partner to the program of performing bridge lending. I suppose that's the category that we're looking at in this particular space. But we have, I think, some 2,500 people basically in our organization, lots of experience in servicing assets, lots of experience in credit and underwriting and risk management. We truly understand the very risky end of the market, and we've learned how to make that market perform for us. We're very data driven. Like if we look at, for example, and I'll kind of touch on our blockchain securitization and digital asset program in a second, but like if we look at the way that we run analytics on the probability of collecting money and the risk that is attached to our underwriting, there are portfolios in our pool where our mathematicians basically run the calculations, and we project within plus or minus 1% on a per annum basis for the pool on how much we collect. So the data and the analytics drives a lot of things, and in our world, like that's kind of the secret sauce, is really understanding the risk and the performance and the data and the analytics. Our blockchain and securitization and digital asset and kind of tokenization of digital assets, the driver is essentially twofold in our world. And this is kind of very interesting for the maker community and for Monetalis. I think this is our interest in that space, is that we're internally looking at how to create liquidity from illiquid markets and illiquid asset classes. And our asset class of distressed is quite illiquid in the space that we work in generally. But if we take a different view to the probability of collection of cash and cash flow, then we can tokenize those cash flows and the risks, then we can view risk in a different way. And we can essentially create a new class of investable assets, whether they're a structured finance type product or a more traditionally securitization type product, where we can deliver a trustworthy valuable product to the investor community that has total trust and transparency and visibility into the data and the analytics and the performance of the underlying through the use of blockchain and attributing that data lineage into the product itself, which essentially solves for, one of the core problems that happened in the global financial crisis back in 2008 and 9, which was the lack of transparency and trust in some of those securitization vehicles that we saw. And we know what the outcome of that was. And so what we're trying to solve for is that trust, transparency in those vehicles and in those instruments, so that when we truly democratize fixed income, we can provide that to our investor community, and we can then ultimately provide liquidity in those markets. And I think that's kind of where the interesting part is. Like, we see the maker community and the things that you're doing around, not only environmental, but social and governance, and trying to democratize finance. It's kind of the same as what we're trying to do on the fixed income side of things and providing liquidity in these markets. So that's a bit of background from Arrow. I'm not generally the right guy to do that, but it's a pleasure to have a crack at it. Any questions? Happy to answer.
Thank you so much, John.
So
Okay.
David. So sorry, I think that was Alan. I cut you off if you wanted to click on?
No. Now I just wanted to say, honestly, the floor is open. Everybody's can ask anything they like, really.
So I was taking some notes. I saw the stuff in the chat, and then the slides that got posted. David, since you're emceeing things, if okay, I'll just run through and kind of address those, and then as the community or anybody else has anything, whichever form, the chat, or if you want to just shout out on the screen, I'll defer to you.
Yeah, sure. Something that would be helpful is if you are talking about a specific question, just be like super clear about the question up front. That makes it a lot easier to follow the thread.
Yeah. So the first one I saw from paper in the chat was just around the discount for maker. So one of the things with the proposal that I put together, any costs, if you will, associated with that's on the Redwood side. So the presentation or proposal, if you will, assumes that any of those would be Redwood's burden. So would not come through to the community. It's worth noting that anytime you're starting something new, right, there's obviously some initial startup costs, and like scalability through time creates efficiencies, which obviously will decrease costs. But it's a Redwood burden, for lack of a better word. So nothing that you would have to be concerned about outside of the proposal that is in front of you all. One thing I think is worth highlighting, there's a concept that we have here called an alignment of interest. So without going down the rabbit hole too far on like structured finance, I think you guys all flip through the MIP, but in short, the way we structure our deals is seniority. There's people at the top of the capital stack that are super senior, and then there's people who are junior or subordinate at the bottom. And simply put, cash and proceeds go in through the top, and any losses go through the bottom. So the higher up on the capital stack, the more protective you are. And we structure our deals so that if you're at the top of the capital stack, which you guys would be in this hypothetical situation, there's 15 percentage points of losses protecting you. So what you can take away from that is, while there was no official number from the great financial crisis in 2008 to say, hey, total losses in the RMBS space was X, that ranges anywhere from mid to high single digits as far as general speculation. And why I highlight that is, if you get to 15 points, it's just an unseen event that hasn't happened in financial markets, given the way it's been structured. So, while we can't guarantee any certainty, we can get hit by a giant meteor and Earth is over, so to speak, but there is a incredible amount of protection or credit enhancement that we put in these deals, so the people at the top of the capital structure can feel really, really strong that they've got a very, very sound asset. And then we've got the history and performance data to suggest that what we've done so far has accomplished that. Furthermore, when we issue deals, Redwood Trust, we retain what's called the first loss piece of our deals. That's the very bottom. And we do that for, as I said, the alignment of interest. So in the event that anything, quote, does go wrong or losses start to occur, Redwood is the first one who feels that pain, none of the investors in the deal. This is very different from what we've observed from almost all, if not all, of our competition. While markets will people will change investment strategies and people will do different things through time. Redwood and what our internal mandate is, we will always take that first loss piece. And it's so that when we talk with yourselves or other investors, any of the decisions that we decide to do around our program, our platform, underwriting guides, I can look everyone in the face and say, hey, we feel good about it, and we feel so good about it. We're the first ones on the hook if something unfortunately does go wrong. And I think that's a really cool thing to highlight because it's very, very different and uncommon, if not non-existent. I can't speak for the entire massive multi-trillion-dollar financial world, but the people that we compete directly with, I know that they're not doing that same thing. There's another question around CMBS or commercial mortgage-backed securities and the inclusion of that collateral. So as it pertains to our Sequoia or SEMT shelf, the answer would be no. We would not cross-collateralize residential and commercial loans. I shouldn't say we shouldn't. Now, if an investor came and said they wanted us to cross-collateralize it, we could and would. The thing is you have very different investors, and there's a very kind of clear line between the two. Having said that, Redwood has another company that we own. It's a subsidiary of ours that does participate in the CMBS space. I throw that out there. It's not relevant to this current MIP proposal, but if as this community continues to expand the areas they want to participate, that is something that we do. We have what we would consider the premier shelf. The company is called CoreVest. You guys wanted to pull up any of their deals, and we can provide this information through the channels that you guys would like if you wanted. They have a shelf called CAFL, C-A-F-L, and they securitize commercial style loans as well. So it's an area that we participate, but would not be relevant or applicable to the proposal we have here. I'm gonna steal from John over at Arrow. We talked about diversification. The network, if you will, of people that we source collateral from is pretty robust. We have 180 approved mortgage originators, and this includes independent mortgage banks, bank depositories, credit unions that we source loans from. And why that's important is, if you've got such a wide saturation of distinctly unique originators, all producing, collateral in alignment in accordance with our underwriting standards, you create diversification, right? Because said differently, if Redwood bought loans from two banks, your exposure effectively is that two banks or those two banks. So the exposure gets greatly decreased and diversified. So it's worth highlighting that. The percentages of the collateral that we do in our deals, which I think we provided some indicative scenarios on what that could and usually looks like, and we can provide more. Happy to provide as much information as we can. We keep that as spread out as we can for all the reasons that I imagine folks would want and be concerned about.
Hey, Jeremy.
Yes.
Just really quick. So in the interest of time, we have about 22 minutes to the end of the call. For each question, I'm going to set up a timer. I'm going to try to get us to do like each answer under 2 or 3 minutes. If we go over, that's all right. But I just want to be cognizant to try to cover as much ground as we can in this short amount of time.
No, I appreciate you reining me in, David. So I'll end with, keep a couple questions coming. Happy to jump on. I probably went over those 2 minutes. I imagine you got a clock going there, David. So I'll pause there. If there's anything else, please let me know.
Yeah, sure.
So do you want me to try and take the questions that you posted here? I'll just to try and knock them out. Why so many MIPs when MIP 65 is just getting started? Well, that really is because I need to make sure that the basically the MIDADAO starts having a sufficient range of options to invest from, right? Because if we only have access to the ETF library via Bank Signum, which is sort of this BlackRock stuff, that really feels insufficient. The idea that you have access to doing deals with Coinbase and other types of lending operations like MIPS 82 seems worthwhile, and then these two as well seems very, very good counterparties and people to work with to build a private credit structure. So again, that's just making sure that you have the right kind of playing field for a MIDADAO to really grow and be productive on. So that's why there's so many MIPs now to make sure that when this MetaDAO starts happening, all is set up and they're ready to perform. So that's it. Can you walk us through you're thinking about why cash flows from the issuances should be reinvested? Okay, yeah, so I mean, so in both of these cases, you've got principal and interest coming in on a monthly basis from these. So if there was a particular need for that cash flow to go back to Maker, for various operating costs or other types of reasons, definitely I think they should go there. Then you would see sort of you would see the vault just shrink from it's 400 now, and then it would just shrink over the next 3 years to 0 as principal and interest gets paid back. But I think it makes more sense to over time find a let's call it a balance where you say, well, actually principal is coming in, the principal you can reinvest again, because we want to retain a position or exposure with Arrow of 400 million and of Redwood of 400 million, or whatever the number is. But you continue that exposure by reinvesting and thereby keeping that sort of balance sheet of Maker in the right dimension. So I think it's a good idea to remain reinvest this cash flow all the time. It retains the exposure, and I think that's what Maker need. But as I said, there's definitely open. I mean, the community can choose to just, okay, now when principal interest comes back, then please keep it, and we need to put it into the surplus buffer and pay back the vault. That's a possibility, and the community can choose. It's just, as I said, I don't really think it's a great choice at this point in time. So that's why we propose it this way. Okay, I'll go to the next one. Now that signal requests are no longer valid, how do you plan on gauging the community's appetite to keep reinvesting versus taking? Yeah, I mean, sort of related to the one. So I'll be honest with you, I need to solve that. So I'll be working with Government Alpha on how do we then submit a getting to know what is the choice of the community, or maybe it is getting to know what is the choice of the MetaDAO. I'm to a certain degree, just like a lot of you, I suppose there is still some unknowns around how this MetaDAO structure versus other is exactly going to work. So I don't have a good answer for you there. All I can say, I definitely want to find a way to be able to put this up and gauge the community's decision on that, so we can make these choices. And as I said, maybe that is actually just the MetaDAO's decision on this that we need to gauge. I'm open. So that's that. Will the Sequoia platform also incur allocations to the CMBS market? No, not in this particular not in this particular case. But as Jeremy said, we could consider that at a later stage. Remember, for working with people like BlackRock or Arrow or Redwood, this is the start of a long history. Hopefully, we're setting up the relationships, we're doing the first deal, we're doing the first transactions, and hopefully that means we have a long term together, right? So at some point, CMBS might be in the cards. I don't have anyone right now. Who bears the balloon risk in the RMBS? Jeremy, I think I'm going to put you on the spot here.
I think you mentioned it, right?
So on the balloon risk.
Okay.
Yeah. So on the balloon risk, so that would be the investor reg, since we're dealing with underlying mortgages from consumers. Every person who takes out a loan has the option to prepay that loan at any time. Following the Great Financial Crisis, prepayment penalties without specific rules attached to them are no longer allowed. None of the collateral that we're buying today has any prepayment penalties. So, ultimately that'd be the investor. The presentation for this MIP that we have proposed, subject to market changes, etc., is actually a discount as far as price, meaning if you think of it in terms of balloon risk, there's actually positive return potential buying a discount that balloons early. Again, that is all subject to a wild range of market moves, and that could theoretically change, but it is ultimately the investor in the bonds.
Sorry, just to follow up on that, is there an RMBS tranches in the portfolio? Is just one straightforward tranche?
I mean, we could. So one of the beauties of not in the structure we have today, but the beauty of structured finance is we can almost structure any tranche an investor would want. So there are very simple forms, what people refer to as like a general A/B structure, where you have like a senior bond and one junior bond. It's very what I'll call vanilla. But again, our job here at Redwood is to create investments in a structured capacity that investors want. What we've found over the years, and then the structure that we utilize is, we talk, as I said before, with money managers, insurance companies, banks. Everybody has a giant range of investment risk tolerance and, different types of capital. And what that means is some people want really, really short bonds. People want really, really long bonds. Some people want super high yielding bonds, and people are okay with low yielding bonds, all somewhere on that proverbial risk tolerance scale. So that's why we've chosen the structure we have, because it aligns with our investor base. So I guess to come back to your question, we could totally do that if there's a different proposed structure. As Alan was saying, I know I speak for Redwood, we hope that this is the beginning of many and a scalable relationship where we get to have this conversation and we can schedule meetings to discuss everything under the proverbial sun around different deal structures. This is what I would call the most straightforward, very vanilla, simple RMBS transaction from our view. And it's structured in a way that you're buying the very top of the capital structure. So it's in this structure, it's the safest, it's the shortest. It's really kind of what we've observed, new participants into space. This is the tranche that people typically gravitate to, has the most enhancement. It's the shortest life on that bond. So your quote repayment exposure duration is as short as it can be. Again, not to say that we couldn't shorten it or find other ways to align with your risk profile, but this is kind of the generic vanilla Redwood structure. So.
Got it, thanks. And you don't bundle any conforming loans in there, right? This is just strictly jumbo.
So we have in the past, right? Because there isn't this we don't. I haven't bought those loans in a while, but we have in the past, because there is an overlap between where like we'll aggregate loans from a loan amount, but meets what is referred to agency high balance, where there is a small overlap. In most of the time, the agency execution is so much better than ours because of that implicit government guarantee that we typically won't be competitive for those loans. So I would hate to say no, never, but I would say through time, because I manage this collateral, we're never been more than like 10 or 15% of overall collateral. Having said that, we tailor things to the investor's desire. So if, we go down this road and people are like, hey, we don't want any exposure there, that is something that Redwood is completely capable and comfortable accommodating.
So Alan, just to understand the MIP 89, hope I'm not confusing both of them, but the Redwood MIP, I guess you're structuring, your team is going to structure the portfolio, what the maker community wants inside. And I guess I'm trying to figure out how are you going to communicate that with the greater maker community to kind of give you guidance of what the appetite is there.
So yeah, so the way we were so let's say so for Redwood, this is quite simple as you say. We're buying these particular tranches and so on. This is how it is. With the way we're doing it right now with Arrow is that we're trying to define a credit box, and that should come out over the next few days into it, and that would specify what kind of portfolios that we would put in to this particular MIP. So we don't have to go, as you said yourself, it would be a little bit impractical that every time that, well, we suggest that we should put 20 million into this particular portfolio, and then next time we think we should put into that. That's a somewhat impractical proposition. So instead, we've developed a credit box that says, okay, as long as the portfolios fit within that in this box, then you can put them in, and those would be. I mean, I'll make sure that you see them when it comes out, and everybody get a chance to comment on it. But things like says, it must be diversified. It must have this maximum in terms of leverage. It must have these types of assets behind it. It must, follow a certain amount of clean money rules, or at least GHG emission accounting. It must have these criteria. So that's the way we sense that. Okay, now we have a box. We have a 300 million line. Arrow provides junior capital. Then we start basically building that out, and that's also why it takes some time to buy and build these portfolios out. So that's why in this MIP we have first taking the funds and putting them into a MIP 65 similar investment strategy, and then over the max 12 months. It's then deployed into these portfolios that are being acquired and set up along the way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then I guess once you get the Endgame scopes, that's also going to help kind of guide you what. Yeah, and with regards to Arrow, I know that there's a appetite there for non-performing loans, NPLs. Can you kind of walk us through what your thinking is there? So. It's 250 million. Yeah.
We won't be doing non-performing loans. Those are not really in scope. The side of our work with Arrow that we're focusing on here is primarily their, let's call it, green lending side of things that they're doing, particularly in real estate and other areas. The non-performing loans, we haven't really dug into it at this moment in time. I think that's, so I think the future is more in something that relates to green lending and ESG lending in my view. So that's where we've focused our efforts here. So the non-performing loans, we don't have anything per se exposed there. The only thing I will say is that all their experience in non-performing loans has given Arrow a substantial advantage in terms of understanding credit risks in an exceptionally low level of detail. So they are quite good at, I mean, for the data we've seen, they've been quite good at underwriting also green lending.
It's Andrew here from Arrow as well. I just back that up, I think, and just agree. Like it's true, Arrow has like a heritage and a pedigree in NPL loans, but kind of as that business has expanded over the years, we've been focused on other areas as well, and we have like a growing green strategy, hard asset backed, hard asset based, and it's perfect to work with Monetalis in that area. So I agree with everything else.
Thank you so much.
Can I also just add one more thing as well? Like it also, because of our heritage in basically collecting in the harder spaces, like when things go bad, we are perfectly positioned, or if things go bad, we are perfectly positioned basically to collect out those assets and liquidate the strategy. So like where somebody else would have to actually allocate that out or bid it out to somebody to do that hard collection, that's our bread and butter, and that's where we learn the credit skills. That's where we learn to manage risk, and that's why we're prepared to go deeper into the risk part of the lending as a junior participant, because we completely understand where that risk lies, and we can deal with the downside if we need to, which essentially protects the 𝘰𝘮𝘳 and protects the investment, protects Monetalis as the senior holder of that debt.
Thank you so much, guys, for chiming in, and thank you, 3F delegate, for the great line of questioning. I guess, Alan, you want to pick it up where we left off?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. How much should we allow any single actor to control? I'm not sure what, so
can I jump in for this question? So
yeah, please.
So I think the question lies with how much control does Monetalis have as an entity versus, because I see that you guys are arranging with different financial partners like Arrow and Redwood. Basically, where does the risk lie if everything was to blow up? Is Monetalis a central point of failure?
So the way we've set up with MIP 65 is definitely that we're not a point of failure. If we left, the things would still take over. There are all the Sygnum is still there, BlackRock is still there, the trustee is still there, the trustee services and so on is still there. We would not be a point of failure, and we're not the ones making the investments, right? The investments are being done by BlackRock and so on through that particular ETF, and it really is the same the same situation here with Redwood and with Arrow. We are not trying to become a single point of failure at all. We're trying to arrange and have a quite clear distinction between who does the end, let's call it the end investment, and who is suggesting or trying to negotiate what we think are appropriate deals or appropriate constructs for Maker. So we've worked with Redwood, we've worked with Arrow to a long extent to set up what we think is the best structure and situation and deal for Maker, and those are the ones you can see in these particular MIPs, and I'm sure they can both tell you how annoying we've been, but that's our job to put those in. We're not the ones who's doing the actual investing, right? So all the tranches are selected by Redwood, and it would be a Redwood instrument, and it would perform irrespective of whether we are there or not. As soon as it's set up, the trust is set up, the other items are set up, it should work as it should. And to a large degree, with Arrow, there's a little bit more involvement, but fundamentally, Arrows are the one proposing the various structures. They're trying to fit it in with that credit box that's being suggested here. So we are truly trying to arrange and do not the end investment. To a large degree, you should see Maker having material counterpart relationships with Arrow and Redwood to a larger degree than really how we are. So that's sort of the arranger role versus the investor role versus the MetaDAO role. Those are sort of we're trying to explore, but yeah, I don't really see our role to be largely or strongly controlling in any particular aspects of it.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I hope that's definitely what we're trying to accomplish here, I will tell you. Then there are some questions here on core units. I think
from
who's monitoring
units.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, that's for the core units, not for me, right?
No, it's for you, but it's from the core units. And I guess it might not actually be for you. I guess this is also just general questions that are being asked around the proposal of these MIPs, because these MIPs are basically like rehypothecating like this USDC.
Yeah, sure.
And so I guess the main question is, who's tracking the whole lot? And actually all three of these, the two questions are related. So who's kind of tracking the whole lot, and do any of the strategic finance or risk, anybody who's really like part of the real world asset management side of things, is there an intention to propose a cap or some sort of rule? Because I believe there's several billion USDC in the PSM. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's liquid right now, available for swaps to DAI, but as you rehypothecated, it's no longer liquid. And so what portion is acceptable?
Yeah, I know that of course strategic finance has some are doing something on this, or thinking about it, and I also know that there's quite some work being undertaken right now in terms of figuring this out in respect of this protector MetaDAO. So I would actually assume that something about this, because of course this is a key aspect to consider. You know, you can't I can't hardly say the word, but you can't do that for all of the USDC, and you know, you need to keep something there, and you need to think about what you have. How do you allocate that in the right way? How much should be in liquid? How much can be liquid? And so on and so forth. But I think that'll come out.
Alan,
Oh yeah,
maybe I can add some color from the strategic finance
please
core unit.
go for it, man. Yeah.
So we are monitoring, obviously, and I posted an ALM forecast, an ALM framework, and plenty of stuff. And I posted an update on the short-term bonds initiative 70 days ago. I think we should go mainly short terms, but there is a strong value of doing some more experimental stuff, and we have a liquidity profile of DAI that allow us to do some stuff. So we are monitoring it. What is a bit difficult to provide guidance to the community is, well, I'm not in liberty to say, well, we will model with this, and this deal, and not this one and this one, because I think they are not going to make it. So we cannot give a guidance in this regard. Obviously, community could say, well, can you model what would happen if we voted for this, and this deal, and not this one? But obviously, I cannot do the computation for all the combinations, because that will be a lot of work. And so there is this bit of issue, and obviously I would raise a big red flag if there was too many commitment. There is not today, but if community vote for all the real world asset deals that are proposed as of today, it would be too much. So, well, I don't know how we could resolve this conundrum, but at least we have a lot of liquidity, so it's not a problem for today, but we need to be selective and move forward. But we should still do some initiative, and I think that's valuable as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no definitive answer. But if community wants to ask any question regarding asset liability management, a specific one, I'm more than happy to answer it on the forum or on the chat.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sebastian. And by the way, just a public service announcement. It's 3 minutes past the technical end of the call, but I am happy to run this for an extra 10 or 15 minutes. And so if you do need to run, that's completely acceptable. But if you could stay, that's also appreciated and probably valuable. And so yeah, if we're satisfied with that, I'm happy to move on to the final few questions.
Okay, sounds good. So how do these two MIPs relate to MIP 65? They relate in concept, as in, I hope that they together present a particular MetaDAO with a really great range of asset options that they can build some awesome portfolios that would fit very well with the situation of the stable coin as DAI. In my view, that's why we put them up. That's on one aspect. And then the other aspect is that we try to make them share some similarities in terms of legal structure and setup, because you save quite a lot of time and money and other things to make sure that they have a certain degree of symmetry and mental energy. This is correct. So that's a big deal too. So that's how they really relate to each other, I think. Can you explain the MIP titles? Why horses? Well, you know, I was always trained that you had to give a project a memorable title or of some sort, and I ride horses and I like horses, so I started using horses. So each MIP we just give give a horse breed name, yeah. And sometimes I can tell you, those who you do these projects with are quite picky what horse breed they want to be, surprisingly. So there you go. Yeah, so that's the reason for it. How is this related to the Clean Money Initiative? Oh, okay. Yeah, so this is quite good. So where it's hard to really relate, government bonds as in MIP 65 to a lot of clean money initiatives. In both cases, we found Redwood and Arrow to be very receptive in terms of trying to think about how to use GHG accounting, greenhouse gas accounting, and thinking about how can you start using clean money initiatives on this, green lending, making sure that your money is going towards, be that mortgages or be that home financing or other types of financing that is helping to improve the environment. Those, we are entirely aligned with the views of Redwood and Arrow on this. So this will help us grow that profile for clean money, as in we're making sure here over time that what we're putting money into, the loans that we're putting money into, are actually helping the world become cleaner and help us with climate change. So these are related to it much more than we can do with any government bond initiative, really. Are there any management fee? How does Monetalis make money? Are there any kickbacks? Well, firstly, there's definitely no kickbacks. There's none of that. So in both cases, we're trying to figure out what are reasonable fees, and the to be honest, the key problem about that is really the fact that this arranger role doesn't really have a lot of great comparables in the financial markets, because then we just say, okay, well, fair enough, that's what usually they get paid, so let's take that and deduct a little or something. So right now we're thinking about fund-to-fund models, which is usually a very low AUM kind of part and some part of overperformance. But we're trying to figure out what are reasonable fees there, and they will always be transparent. We'll always make sure that whatever we suggest we could get in fees, we put those into the MIPs, so they'll be in there, within the next few weeks, as soon as we get to there. But it will be something like AUM something and some overperformance piece as in part of the interest rate or whatever, or yield or something. But we're fund to fund is probably the best comparable right now for some of the tasks that we do, and that's probably going to be the way we're going to construct the fee setup as well, similar to that. Okay, I think I went through them all.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, thank you so much, Alan. And I'm going to give just a couple minutes of opportunity for the people on the call. There's many delegates here. There's a bunch of other random stakeholders. So yeah, if anybody has any additional questions, I see some stuff going on in chat. I'm not going to reiterate all that stuff in chat. But yeah, if anybody has any burning questions, feel free to bring them up. And if not, thanks for joining.
Okay, sounds good. Great. Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you guys. This was extremely valuable.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.